Let me begin by welcoming everybody to this webinar that's brought to you by the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council and the University of Tennessee's Residential and Community Forestry Working Group. And it's made up of those institutional arms of UT, which you can see on the screen, but it's been a great partnership. This is our second year that we have provided these free monthly webinars to the public. We try to cover issues that are relevant to trees and Tennessee communities and actually beyond our state. And to make this as appealing to as many people who love trees in their communities as possible. I mean, that's why we have kind of a variety and eclectic list of topics, of which one we have today I'm looking forward to. That's that's our background on that. I will say that for those of you joining us for the first time, we do offer ISA CEUs. If you sit through the entire webinar, and you don't have to do anything to turn in your points. All you have to do is in your registration, give us your certification number and your name. And what we will do at the end of this webinar is we will look at who attended the full length, and we will mark you off and send in to the Southern chapter that you attended this, and you'll get your CEU. And we'll give you some information on that a little bit later. Our topic today is a very timely one. Here in Nashville, it's 27 degrees, and we've had 3 snows already this year. We've actually had a real winter, and that is winter tree care tips for homeowners. And our speaker is going to be Wes Hopper, who's the natural resource manager with the City of Germantown in West Tennessee. And Wes, we're going to get into this in just a little bit later, but let me go through one other additional item on our housekeeping. You've heard about our CEU requirement, and we'll do the next slide. I want to make sure that your name is recorded on the list, and that'll show up on the screen here. And if you are looking to get your CEU, we need to have you make sure that your name is listed. If it is not, this is the instructions on how to do it. There's a step 1, 2, and 3. Under participants, click that. And in the participants list on the right side, zoom window, hover over your name and click on the rename button, and then you can type in your name, but make sure you do that. The other item on housekeeping has to do with Q&A. Wes's presentation, we're going to let him go through the entire PowerPoint slides that he has, but at the end, if you have any questions, you can enter those in the chat room, and Elisa, after Wes concludes his talk, she will read out your question and he will answer those as we do that. And you can enter the questions throughout his presentation. It won't interrupt him at all. So with that, Wes, we want to get to know you a little bit better. I've been privileged to work with you over the past year with the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council. But Wes brings a lot of experience here in Tennessee, and I wanted to make sure I did a good job of introducing you. So you know what I did? I contacted Judy Schellebarger to send me a couple of bullet points on you. Well, apparently she couldn't hone those down to just 2 or 3, and she sent in a page load here. But let me just read some of the things that Judy told me about you, which I think this audience needs to know. And I'm going to read it verbatim here. Wes has been an arborist and an owner of a tree service firm for years. He is currently natural resource manager with Germantown Parks in Germantown, Tennessee. He loves to climb trees. He even takes his grandchildren up so they will understand the beauty of nature. He teaches 4-H classes and speaks about trees in our school system. He works with other arborists offering free tree service to veterans who are in need. He takes time to certify every arboretum around Memphis. He's a great teacher. Every year he teaches our urban forestry class for the West Tennessee chapter of the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council. He has been treasurer of the West Tennessee chapter for years. He is an all-around good guy, faithful to his word. Not many people know that he is also a poet. And Wes, we may see a little bit of your lyrical talents here in this presentation. But above all, she said that he is loved by everyone in our chapter. And that alone, Wes, says a lot about you and your character and your passion for trees. And with that, we want to learn more about tree care, and let's turn it over to you.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Judy, if you're out there. That was quite an introduction. If I had to talk about all my experiences in tree care, I don't know if we'd have enough time within this hour. Something that was not mentioned, Neil, is that I do have, like, this is my 39th year in arboriculture this year. And I'm trying to minimize this screen here. Whoop, hang on. Yeah, and I do appreciate that introduction. And being a natural resource manager, I don't know if there's any other natural resource managers in this group right here, but it's a very interesting career. Not only do I get to manage trees now, but I get to manage wildlife and invasive species in a variety of different parts of arboriculture. But today we're going to talk about winter tree care. And go back. Winter tree care is vital to taking care of your trees. It's the best time to care for your trees. What the general, and the way that I approach winter tree care is taking it through the consumer. I used, when I was teaching the certified arborist study course, I was trying to reach out to the arborists, the people that were performing the tree care, to educate them on how to approach proper tree care. And what I learned was that the majority of the people that were doing the tree care were in it for the money. Of course, we all go to work for money, so there's nothing wrong with that at all. But the wintertime is when the tree care industry and the landscape industry, it generally slows down due to the weather. But what the consumer fails to understand is, like, when the trees turn green, and you've seen a lot of it during our COVID pandemic, when the trees turn green, the people are going outside, their grass is turning green, everything's growing, and then they think that, oh, now's the time to take care of my trees when the trees are growing. Well, that's not true. Textbook says the best time to prune your trees is cold. That's what the book says. It says cold, when it's cold, when the trees are dormant. But dormant is not necessarily true either, because the trees are still growing during the winter. It's just that the deciduous trees will shed their leaves, and then they're preparing to for the following year to grow their new leaves. So winter is the best time to actually prune your trees. So with that being said, the consumer, the people that make the paychecks for the tree care companies, you guys out there that own trees and you pay people to come to work on your trees, you expect them to know what your trees need, which is good, that you want to hire a tree professional, and we're going to talk about that. But when you want to hire someone to come to take care of your trees, you want to know what to expect when you have that professional arborist come out to take care of your trees. So you make plans to prune your trees, like being timely about it. You want to protect your trees from freezing. You want to mulch to retain the moisture. You want to continue to water during the winter months. That'll keep the soil from drying up and your roots freezing, and you can fertilize during the winter. The best time of the year to prune or trim trees and shrubs is winter, November through March. Most trees are dormant and less susceptible to insects and disease. Light pruning can be performed in the warmer seasons, like if you have to remove some branches to clear your roof or what have you. That can be done any time of the year, but your typical 25% pruning should be done in the winter. Removal of dead limbs for risk management, pruning can be performed any time of the year. So anytime that you need to have a dead limb removed, because the trees are growing, it's just like our hair. Every morning I get up, I got long hair. I brush my hair and the hair comes out. So the trees are going to do the same thing. They're going to shed the branches throughout the year. So the dead limb removal can be performed any time of the year. Know your trees. Okay, this is very important. Every tree has its own personality and should be treated differently. One of the issues that I've had in one of the classes that we teach here in our urban forestry advisor classes is tree ID. We have spring tree ID classes and we have winter ID classes. One of the issues that I've ran across while educating another arborist or other arborists in a group is that the failure to understand what type of tree that they're working on. We know what an oak tree is. We know what a pecan tree is. We know what an elm tree is, but what type is it? Understanding the species of tree that you have is important to know, because the trees do have different personalities. They have a different vascular structure. Let's take, for example, a water oak. Should you prune a water oak like you would a cherry bark oak, okay, or a willow oak, for example? Water oaks typically grow rather fast. They have a larger distance between the growth rings. There's a lot of cellulose in between those growth rings. So if you were to remove a large limb off of a water oak, chances are that wound that you leave on that tree is going to decay and that tree is going to become hollow over time. So you treat a water oak different than you would a willow oak or southern red oak. A southern red oak typically only needs to have the deadwood removed. But a water oak, the canopy needs to be subordinated. But when you remove large branches off of a water oak, you're looking for trouble. So treat each tree differently. Next slide, please. Understand what your trees need. You must learn what species of tree that you have. Get a book. My favorite is the National Audubon Society trees of the eastern part of the country, eastern Tennessee, or a field guide to oak trees. Understand what kind of tree that you're working with. Treat all your trees differently. Don't treat them the same. I don't know about you guys, but I have a lot of children. I've raised 4 children and I have 11 grandchildren. And I promise you, each one of them is different. I have 18 trees on my property in a very small lot. Each tree gets treated differently. So understand what you have in your landscape before you hire someone to work on that tree. Next slide, please. Learn to assess your trees before hiring a professional arborist. Just go outside and take a look at your tree. Everybody today that's in this presentation, when you go outside, look up in your trees and see what you have and study it, look at it from a distance, look at it up close, get up close and personal with it, put your hand on it, understand what you have in your yard. Again, this presentation is meant to educate the consumer. I would like to see each one of you guys that are in this presentation, if you're a professional arborist, convey this information to your client. Teach your clients how to understand what they're expecting when they hire the arborist to come out. Know what service to expect to pay for. Or do you need the crown cleaned out? That means, cleaning up unnecessary growth or dead branches up in the canopy. Does it just need a few dead limbs removed? Do you need weight reduction, depending on the species of tree? How do you look at that tree limb? Let's look at just the limb itself. What condition is that limb in? Is it bowing down on the end? Is it growing upright? Do you need weight reduction? Canopy inspection. Oh, that's a big one. We have been hired over the years just to not perform the duties of the tree care, but to climb the trees or get in a bucket truck and go up and just do a canopy inspection. That's to go up and look at that cavity in that tree. Look at is this tree worth keeping in the landscape when I have to build that addition onto my house? Let's make sure that this tree is healthy enough to stay. So go up and do a canopy inspection. We have found some very interesting things with our canopy inspections. We have gone up in the tree before and not been able to see it from the ground, but got up in the tree and discovered that the entire tree was hollow. And we're going to talk about that on one of the additional slides. And also outside the canopy inspection, wintertime is a good time to fertilize. Nowadays, the fertilizers for most trees is a slow release fertilizer. That means that the nitrogen is held together by carbon instead of like the quick release, which the nitrogen is held together by salt. So that means that the fertilizer could be in the ground over the winter time, and come springtime, that carbon slowly releases that nitrogen. That's where you get that slow release fertilizer from. If you note this picture that we have in this particular slide, this is not a wintertime picture, but it's a good example of what you can't see during the growing season and what you can see when the leaves are not on the tree. You see in the picture that there's some broken branches, there's a cavity up there. You can't see all this during the springtime. So the canopy inspection would be important to do during the wintertime. Next slide, please. Crown cleaning is the selective removal of dead, diseased, broken, or weakly attached branches from a tree's crown. This fella in this picture here, that's what he does. He's a retired mechanical engineer. He's 75 years old, believe it or not, but I've had the pleasure of climbing with him. And what he does is he climbs trees and he does canopy inspections. And that's how he makes his living. But that would be crown cleaning, the selective removal of dead, diseased, broken, or weakly attached branches from a tree's crown. Next slide. Dead wood removal can be done any time of the year. Again, dead wood removal is the removal of dead branches for safety and to help prevent disease and insect invasion. As a tree owner, you should be out in your yard throughout the year and just look for dead branches. I have a nuttall oak in my yard, and we're going back to knowing what type of tree that you have. A nuttall oak is a tree that you don't have to thin out. It thins its own self out. And what you should remove in a nuttall oak would be the dead wood only and include the bark, unnecessary growing branches. This photo in this tree is a Osage orange. It was located in Holly Springs, Mississippi. It was the largest Osage orange in the nation at the time. The ice storm of '94 had taken it out. But I went through three chains on my chainsaw, removing the dead wood from this tree because the dead wood was so hard. Next slide, please. This tree in this picture here is our most recent addition to our champion trees in the state of Tennessee. This is the state champion American elm. You can see me standing in front of the trunk of this tree. It was massive, but I put 3 climbers in this tree and we did a canopy inspection. We took photographs of every portion of this tree as we were climbing it. And we did come to find out, you couldn't tell from standing on the ground if you were doing a canopy inspection from the ground, just looking up and doing an assessment, but from the ground level. But we discovered that this tree here is entirely, completely hollow. Where I'm standing at is hollow, but you couldn't see that until you got up into the canopy and looked through one of the cracks. And I took a throw line, which for those of you that may not know, but a throw line is our weighted ball that we use to set our lines in the tree in order to set to get up in the canopy of the tree to climb. And that string went all the way down to the ground level, and we were actually able to measure the depth of the decay in that tree. Tree still standing. The homeowner's willing to accept the risk that comes along with it, but what the work that was performed on this tree later was the canopy reduction, where we took if I remember correctly, that tree had a 165-foot canopy spread, and we just went out on each one of the laterals and remove some weight off the tree. So that was not only a canopy inspection, but it was a canopy reduction. Next slide, please. This is another American elm. And remember earlier when I was talking about understanding the species of tree that you have, for those of you that may or may not remember, back in the day, back in the beginning of my career, back in the early 80s, there was a nationwide spread of the Dutch elm disease. And this became a tree that was very much in decline. And obviously, this tree here that you see in the photograph is a survivor, and so is the American elm in the previous slide. The best time of the year to prune these trees is winter time. You do not want to prune the elm tree in the growing season, because when you make the wound on the tree will release its chemicals, its gases, and which attracts the elm bark beetle or bark beetles, which carry the pathogen for the Dutch elm disease. So the best time of the year to prune the American elms is definitely winter time. This tree here in particular, it gets treated with microinjections for the fertilizers. Obviously, it's extremely large, and that is at the Dixon Art Gallery and Gardens in the city of Memphis. Next slide, please. This tree here in this picture is the Mississippi State Champion Catalpa tree. It was talking about the canopy inspections. As I was visiting this tree, I was on a deposition for a legal case that I was working on, and we visited this tree at the Ole Miss campus. And obviously, it's extremely large. It turns out that this tree is completely hollow. And upon this visit with a canopy inspection, I noticed that this tree was coming apart. So we were able to strap this tree back together and did some weight reduction on it, and we managed to preserve this tree. And if you want to visit that tree, it is on the Ole Miss campus. There is a fence around it. The tree does not require fertilization. It requires minimal amount of maintenance, especially after we strapped it together. Next slide, please. Mulching. Mulching the tree is good, and it can be bad. Depends on if you over mulch or if you mulch it too deep. Mulch actually helps the root system to retain moisture during the dry season, and it also helps it to retain its heat during the cold season. So in our area, we recommend that you don't mulch any deeper than 3 to 4 inches, and absolutely do not volcano mulch. As you can see in this photograph in this slide, this massive interface of roots, that is the results of over mulching. On this particular property that this photograph was taken, the entire neighborhood was mulched like this. The reason it was mulched like this is because it was a homeowners association, and the person that was in charge of managing the landscape over the years thought that volcano mulching was the proper way to do things. And therefore, he has created an issue with the trees. Most of these trees were red maples, and most of these trees are in decline from the girdling roots. So over mulching could be a problem, but proper mulching, it can be managed if the landscape company knows what exactly they're doing. If they're getting paid by the pound or getting paid by the dump truck load, that could be an issue. If they understand the proper mulching techniques, that would be good. But know what to expect before you hire someone to mulch your trees. Next slide, please. Surface roots from over mulching. It's best to remove in the wintertime. The surface roots on my trees, personally, at my house, I don't mulch. I use topsoil. But when I do have roots that are growing up on the surface, I remove them. I wait until the winter time, and I'll take a pair of loppers, or in some cases, I'll take an axe, and sometimes I'll take a pair of hand pruners, and I'll remove those roots that are growing on the surface. Surface roots can be an issue if you have elderly people in the house, or handicap or whatever. The surface roots can be a problem as a trip hazard. Next slide, please. Another issue right here with girdling roots. These can be removed easily with a pair of hand pruners. I would definitely wait till the winter time to do this type of root pruning. Here at the Liberty Bowl Stadium, they call it the Tiger Alley, where the University of Memphis Tigers basketball team plays and the football team plays. Every tree that they had in the parking lot, and they were mostly overcup oaks, but they were over mulched over time. They were all about 10 to 12 inches in diameter, and all the surface roots were on top of the ground. No roots were encouraged to grow deep. The tree roots were growing just like this one in a girdling fashion. These girdling roots will potentially kill the tree. It'll just choke it out. So I went out there at the end of the fall, in the wintertime, and I took a rake and I pulled back these roots, and I took away the surface roots that were there, and any of these girdling roots there I was able to remove. And that's been probably 5 years ago, and the trees are much healthier. There's less decline in the canopy. And I did communicate with the city horticulturists, and they were able to manage the continued efforts of preserving the trees. Next slide, please. Plarting versus topping. Okay, I wanted to talk about this because it's not a typical practice in this area, but I had to talk about it. Several years back, I was invited to the UT in Knoxville to speak about the topping of trees that was going on throughout the Smoky Mountains. And the topic was to stop topping the trees in the Smokies. So I was invited along with 3 other professional arborists to speak about what to do about the topping. And ironically, every one of us that showed up to give our lecture talked about the same topic. We didn't know we were going to talk about the same topic, which was plarting, but plarting is a practice. It's a European style of pruning to harvest wood without removing the whole tree, and to also manage trees in restricted areas. Notice I said European. The Europeans, Italy, Scotland, England, they live in, a lot of the cities are very crowded, and so they had to manage the trees to be sustained in an environment where they had little room to grow, or they had to manage the trees over thousands of years, actually, where they didn't clear cut a forest, so they treated their trees like a harvest. So they would practice this type of pruning, which is plarting, over the years to manage the tree's canopy and to manage their firewood and lumber, depending on what they were, what size of wood that they were harvesting out of the tree over the years, without removing the whole tree. So it's more of a crop style. So when these European settlers come over to what is now the United States, they would practice this same type of pruning, the plarting, but it turned into more of a style of topping, where topping is the indiscriminate removal of the tree's upper canopy. And the problems with plarting when it turned into topping is the migrants, or the immigrants that were coming from Europe, they would start the process of plarting and not return to continue with the maintenance of such. So therefore it became this type of what we call topping now, which is the indiscriminate removal of the tree's upper canopy. Next slide, please. This is my pecan tree in my backyard, and I've been planting this tree in here the last 7 years. I've actually been planting it for a much longer period of time. Excuse me. The reason that I started planting this pecan tree in my backyard was that obviously you can see behind that tree is utility wires and a transformer. I did not want to look at that transformer. The city forestry division come in and they pruned this tree back away from the power lines, and therefore it left the rest of the canopy overhanging my house. It was ugly. It's typically, you know what a tree that's been pruned by the utility company looks like. It's very lopsided. So backing up to the next slide, when I was telling that I was speaking about the trees being being topped in the Smokies, if I'm going to talk about plarting a tree and explain to it what plarting is, I have to learn how to practice it myself. So instead of removing this tree, I started the plarting process on this tree. And only in the wintertime do I remove these the sprouts that come up off this tree. Obviously, you can see that the leaves are on this tree as I'm pruning it out, but honestly, that tree is an experiment for me. So I wanted to try this before the leaves fell off on this particular occasion when I pruned this tree, so that I can explain the process to you guys on the proper time of the year. The proper time of the year to prune this tree in the plarting process would be the winter. Next slide, please. This is one of the disadvantages. I don't know if you can see very well in this slide here, but one of the disadvantages of not maintaining a plarted tree or topping a tree would be the weak sprout connections that grow from the heading cut. They have a tendency to break off. In this particular case, the squirrels chewed through the bark and it broke off. But the weak sprout connections is the one disadvantage of plarting a tree and not maintaining it or topping a tree. I do not recommend topping a tree, and I really don't recommend plarting a tree because that's what I'm learning from this process right here. This tree will probably be removed in the near future. I'm not quite sure yet on that decision because I still appreciate the tree, but the disadvantage, another disadvantage of the plarting process is that it is labor intensive. It's a lot of work. I honestly believe that the less you have to do to a tree, the better off it'll be. But maintain it, and prune it the way that it should grow. The less work you have to do to it, the better off your tree is going to be. Next slide, please. This is growth on a poorly pruned crepe myrtle. Crepe myrtle trees should be pruned in the winter time, or the late winter is another good time. Typically before February in our region. It may be different in other parts of the country. This tree here was located at the Shelby County Agricultural Center. It had been headed back year after year after year. It was in a horrible condition. And actually there was a whole row of these. You can watch, if you wanted to pull it up on YouTube, Wes Hopper pruning crepe myrtles, you can pull it up on YouTube. It'll be on the Family Plot show of the process and be going through pruning this crepe myrtle. Next slide, please. That was the before picture. This is the after picture. This is what we call rejuvenation pruning. This is on the same crepe myrtle as the slide before. If you can see in the screen, in this photo, there's like 3 stems that coming off each former heading cut. And all I did with this was remove all the unnecessary growth. And then I removed the seed caps or the seed holes that were remaining at the tips, which I removed about, I don't know, about probably 6 to 12 inches off of the upper canopy just to remove those old seed pods that were on there. and left the stems and did not do the heading cuts on this again. So this would be what we call rejuvenation pruning, performed in the wintertime, obviously. Now the problem that came up with this particular tree right here, the whole row of trees, after I had pruned them all in this condition, and to me, I did a really good job on this type of rejuvenation pruning. But the maintenance guy was sitting in his truck watching me do all this work to these things, and the following day he came through and he cut them all back down to where they were before. He did the heading cut on these, and he almost lost his job because of that. But he took all my efforts of cutting these trees back, to where they are in this photo, and he headed them back like they were before. So there, with that being said right there, it was an example of him looking at me like I was doing too much work. I didn't know what I was doing, and he came back through and thought he was doing the right thing and did that heading cut. Next slide, please. A bleeding tree. This is a stump cut that was performed in the early spring. This is I couldn't find any photos to show you of a maple tree or a river birch tree that when the cut was made in the springtime, when the buds were starting to open up and the fresh leaves were starting to come out. But this is a stump cut. It's a bleeding tree, stump cut in the early spring. Some trees like maples and birch should not be pruned while the leaves are emerging, while the leaves are breaking out. Do not prune these trees in the early spring. Maple trees, birch trees will bleed if you make those cuts when the leaves are freshly coming out or breaking out. What I mean by bleeding, it doesn't mean that they're bleeding blood or anything, but they're bleeding their sap. So what happens is these tree roots are active, okay? The temperatures are getting warmer. The water's in the ground. We have our early spring rains. The trees are pulling up the sap of the water through the vascular tissue. That sap has to go somewhere. That water has to go somewhere. So usually it should go out to where the buds are breaking out and nourish the new leaves that are coming out, okay? And that pushes it out. But if you make that cut on the apical stem of that branch, or take that limb off, what's going to happen? That the water and sap is going to come up and it's going to go straight out that vascular tissue that you just opened up, and it's just going to go right back out of the tree, not providing any nourishment at all. So that's what we mean by a bleeding cut. Next slide, please. Planting a tree. The best time to plant trees is, fall to early spring. I think everyone knows that. Trees get planted all through the year. The best survival time of the year for the tree to survive, though, it would be from the fall to the early spring. This is one of my granddaughters here that's planting this tree. This tree was planted over close to Rhodes College. And I think we planted 163 trees that day. Not just her and I, but we had a whole team. But we were planting trees to restore the neighborhood after Hurricane Elvis passed through and blew down thousands of trees in the Memphis area. But plant a tree, the best time to plant is fall to early spring. And we're going to call it winter time. Next slide, please. Community tree planting. I think if you can bring a community together to plant trees, it's a wonderful thing. The Wolf River Conservancy has a day coming up very soon, either the end of this month or the beginning of February, to plant trees. Create a forest. I had a young man on several years back. It was in February. We were planting thousands of trees actually on for the Wolf River Conservancy, and this 10-year-old kid looks at me and he's holding this little sapling in his hand. He says, "How do I plant this?" And I pointed at the forest and I said, "You plant it just like that." And he says, "Man, ain't nothing straight in nature." I said, "No, it isn't." So we planted a forest, and now you can go back to that area where we planted those trees, and yeah, we have a mini forest. Next slide, please. How to hire a professional arborist. You go to www.isa-arbor.com, go to the toolbar that says find an arborist, and you type in your zip code, and it'll direct you to individuals that are certified arborists, and it'll give you their contact information from there. Preferably a certified arborist. You would like to hire a certified arborist is an individual that has gone through the qualifications to prove that he is a professional arborist, and he has to maintain the continued education units, the CEUs, like some of you guys in the audience are, and you continue with your education. And also referrals from friends that have had good experiences with the individuals. You don't have to be a certified arborist to be a true professional, but to be a true professional in the tree care industry, it means that you love what you do. It's a very hard way to make a living. But if you have friends that have had good experiences with the tree service and they're not certified, then that's okay. Just as long as they have the knowledge of understanding what you as a tree owner should expect. And also, I'm going to go back and say this again. If you're the consumer, understand what you expect to have performed to your tree. That way you can just tell your arborist what you need, and he's not going to sell you a bag of beans saying you need borer applications, you need this tree trimmed back, or you should remove this tree. You know, maybe you don't need to remove it. But just understand, go through the efforts of getting your continued education. Attend the urban forestry advisor classes that they're offered in your area. We have them offered here in Shelby County. I believe Nashville has it, some classes that they do offer. Josiah Lockard, I think he's heads up some of those educational opportunities. Well, take advantage of them. Get the books. Next slide, please. This is what the toolbar looks like. You can find an arborist on the Trees Are Good, the ISA website. Next slide. Why you should hire the professional arborist. A professional certified arborist should understand the needs of your trees. This tree in particular was in the city of Bartlett when I was formerly a consultant for the city of Bartlett. Every tree in this parking lot, which was about 20 willow oaks, was pruned like this. This property owner, this shopping mall property owner, felt like these trees were blocking the view of his shopping center, and he hired his landscaper. I'm not knocking landscapers, but landscapers are not arborists, generally speaking. But this fella that was, or crew that was hired to prune these trees, oh my goodness, these trees were in a horrible condition. This is about 10 years ago this photo was taken. But if you go back to the trees now, they had some irregular growth in the canopy, but trees are resilient. Even if the trees get pruned improperly, doesn't mean that they have to be removed. Let the tree rejuvenate itself and then come back in, like I showed you with the picture of the crepe myrtles earlier when we did the rejuvenation pruning. I believe that you can come back and restore these trees to where they'll regain their canopy. So if you were to see these trees now, they haven't been maintained. The growth did come back, but they're just kind of wiry right now. But I did recognize that there was some good growth that did come back, and they can be rejuvenated. Remember, trees are resilient. Next slide, please. This really happened. Can you see where this guy's is attached to? I believe this fella is taking on a little bit more work than he can, but he's obviously not a professional. He has one rope attached to the crane that he's using to remove this tree, and the other one he's tied into the light, to the electrical pole. It's totally ridiculous. So if you hire somebody that says that they're a professional, check their insurance, and get some references. Next slide, please. Also, in the wintertime, a lot of wildlife takes refuge in the tree's canopy. So be aware of the wildlife that take that overwinter in the trees that we prune. If possible, wait till a later time to perform the tree care. It always breaks my heart to be up in the tree and we remove the tree or we take out branches and it has animals living in it. Doesn't matter if it's a snake or this flying squirrel like what's in here. One winter we removed a tree and the tree did not have to be removed. It was an area where it could have stood and remained as a wildlife habitat, but we removed it. It's what the property owner wanted. And we had about 40 of these flying squirrels that flew out of the hollow that was in this tree. So just be respectful of the wildlife. As a natural resource manager, that's part of what I do. I manage wildlife as well. Next slide, please. Babycast says to keep your trees healthy and be safe out there. Yes. And by the way, the tree that you see this young lady in, I planted that tree in 1996, and that's where I do a lot of education in. We study the insects that are in this tree. We study the growth patterns of it and what have you. And I train little climbers. Next slide, please. And there's my contact information. If anyone has any questions, write down the number. I'm free to anybody that wants to call me on occasion. You can send me a text. I know that diagnosing trees or issues, you know, from a cell phone picture is not really definitive diagnosis, but it seems to work with long distance situations. Okay, that's it for the presentation today. Remember to do your homework, understand the trees that you have on your property, convey that information to your clients, and continue on with your good efforts in the urban forestry. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. We've got a couple of questions in the chat. And
Okay.
just a reminder, if anyone else has a question, because we've got about 8 minutes left. If you've got a question you didn't type in, go ahead and put it in the chat now. This one you kind of addressed in your presentation, but one question is, what should I look for in selecting a qualified tree service who can help me assess my tree and treat any problems?
One of the approaches that I have is like, what I've been hired for is to not have a dog in the fight, okay? So you hire a consulting arborist. There's not a lot of people that are technically consulting arborists, and you pay a fee to have them come out and take a look at your trees to tell you what you need, instead of hiring somebody that's coming out to look at your property to tell you, you know, that I need to sell you this, I need to sell you this, you know, because they're out there too, and they'll try to sell you something that you really don't need. So I've done this for a lot of real estate companies. When their new client is going to buy, they're going to buy a home, but they don't want to buy somebody else's issues. So what I would do is go out and inspect the trees prior to the person signing the paperwork. So hire a consulting arborist. They're hard, they're not always easy to find. So you want to hire somebody that doesn't have a dog in the fight, if that makes sense.
It does, thank you. Okay, another question. Are there any signs I can look for if my tree has been damaged by cold weather or freezing?
Repeat that, please.
Are there any signs I can look for to see if my tree has been damaged by cold weather or freezing?
Yes, we had a lot of our crepe myrtles here in the Memphis area that had a lot of dieback. We had 2 hard freezes, early freezes in a row, and the canopies did die back. Another one would be frost crack. It's when we have a late freeze in the early spring and the sap is rising, and then it freezes, and that it's like putting a soda bottle in the freezer with the cap on it, and it bursts inside the freezer because the liquid froze. It's the same way with the tree's trunk, like a red maple and some oak trees, that cold wind will blow and freeze that sap while it's up in the trunk of the tree, and it'll cause that trunk to burst. So you don't want to mistake that with like a injury from impact. So yeah, those are the two main ones right there. If you have an evergreen, you can tell that the foliage would be browned up, like on your boxwoods, for example. You can get, I forget what they call it. Darn it, it slipped my mind. But you can have freeze on your evergreen foliage too.
Okay, last question in the chat. What advice do you have if I want to prune a tree myself?
There's a lot of, you can go to YouTube. You can learn about, there's simple guides that you can have about, proper pruning, where to make that pruning cut at. A big mistake that non-professionals make is making just like a heading cut, where they just take the pruners and they cut it back to the edge of the sidewalk, or they don't understand directional pruning. You can make it more simple than what it really is. Understand the type of plant that you have and what your goal is. If you're pruning a dogwood that has opposite twig pattern growth, you can reduce that canopy by making a simple snip by taking the apical growth off and just bring it back to where the branches stem at. Directional pruning, there's so many different types of pruning that you could do. When I have a pruning class here in Germantown, I pass out a simple book on pruning. And the ISA website does have pamphlets that you can purchase too, on pruning mature trees, pruning young trees. I have a stack of them here in my office that I pass out. So the information is out there. All you have to do is look for it. And also, I've been hired to come out to a property to teach homeowners how to take care of their small trees so that they can do it themselves and not have to hire that professional. A lot of people just really, really enjoy being in the yard. And I had a master gardener tell me once that if you have a landscape that you really enjoy tending to, before you go out into your yard, put your pruners in your back pocket. And when you see something that needs a little snip, just snip it here, snip it there, and you don't have to do all the work at one time. Okay, I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's good advice. Well, that's all the questions in the chat. I'm going to turn it back over to Neil.
Okay, thank you, Elisa, and you too, Wes. I'm going to throw in a question while we have a few minutes. You mentioned tree planting is a good time of the year to do that. What would you suggest to help us find the right tree for the right place? Get the right species.
Oh, that's a really good question. That's a very broad question. It depends on the landscape that you have. I can tell you this, Neil, that I mentioned earlier that I had 18 trees. I actually have 15 trees in my yard, and I have probably planted twice that many and removed as many trees as I have, because in my small yard, I was planting trees that I appreciated. They look good in someone else's yard. They didn't fit my yard. And so I've learned what works in my yard and what I like. Again, get that book, get a book that tells you about the trees. Visit an arboretum. I do inspect many arboretums, Neil. I've been on the board of directors for the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council for almost a little over 20 years. Our arboretums are special. If you want to see how a tree grows in a particular landscape, visit the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council's website, find that list of arboretums in your area, visit them, and see how that tree looks in the mature atmosphere. That's the best advice I could give you right there, Neil.
That's good advice.
Right tree in the right place. Right tree in the right place is very important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, Wes. It's an excellent presentation, and
Somebody is
And,
asking about, can I list the books again? You can see on the screen, Field Guide to Native Oak Species of Eastern North America and the Audubon Society of the Trees of Eastern Tennessee, or the Eastern region. Those are my two favorites. One thing to understand about oak tree identification, oak trees are very promiscuous. They cross-pollinate. You may be looking at one and the willow oak and it's actually a water oak, you know, cherry bark oak and it's actually a black oak. Yeah.
Well, great, good information, and thank you. And I will say that this was not only informative, Wes, but inspiring, and especially to know that hopefully when I turn 75, maybe I can learn how to climb a tree and do the kind of things that that mechanical engineer was doing. But it just shows that there's a passion for trees amongst all ages, all people, all groups, and the more we learn about them and care for them, the better off we'll be as a society.
Yeah. There's a reason I have my grandchildren in these presentations. It's because I want to inspire us as adults to remember that we do have a next generation coming up to be taking our place in the field of arboriculture, nature.
Absolutely, great. Well, thank you again. And I want to thank Elisa, you for handling the behind the scenes on this. We really appreciate it. This was your first time doing it. You did an outstanding job. Look forward to next month on our next presentation. But I also want to thank those of y'all that sat through the Wes's presentation. It encourages us that, that we can try to continue to find topics that would be of interest to you. And if you have a suggestion for a future webinar, something you would like to learn about trees or caring for trees or getting involved in the community tree program, just zip us a note in the chat box and we will definitely consider that, because we are still lining up topics for the rest of the year. Lisa, can we show that slide once again about the ISA for those of folks that maybe have not listed their name on their queue there. There we go. If you need CEUs for this, attending this program, ISA CEUs, we need to make sure your name is listed on your queue, is what I'll call it. If not, you can change it and enter that now, and then we'll take it over from there and submit that for your certification. So I think we'll just leave that slide up. And there's another one. Thank you. An email.
There we go.
You're doing great, Elisa. If you still need ECUs and didn't enter your information during registration, just send a note to Elisa's email address. We'll leave it up a second. You can jot that down. america@utk.edu. All right. And then just to wrap this up, I want to show the people that are responsible for putting this together. Many hands make the load light, and that's been the case here. And I really appreciate all these folks for making this webinar series possible. So thank you again, and thank you, Wes. And we will announce our next webinar on February 17th, I believe is the next date. They're usually the third Thursdays of each month. And we'll have information on that very, very soon. But y'all take care and stay safe and stay warm.
Thank you.